What is it?
The main thing I got from it was like this sense of feeling seen and validated.
Well, why does it have to be this way?
This book was placed in my hand for this moment.
Insightful, learned a lot, wrote some quotes that I'm ready to like paint on my wall.
I love this book!
That we just kind of pull out some of the big themes that we see and talk about a few different ones.
I apologize if most of my contribution has K-pop references.
Alternative book title, The Feminine Mystique Part 2. You were really just gay all along. Welcome to Book Club.
With Julia.
And Victoria.
We are two lifelong friends who read a book and talk about it each episode.
This is a podcast where we use books to explore new perspectives and use them as tools for personal and community growth.
This week, we are reading Those Who Leave and Those Who Stay by Elena Ferrante. This is book 3 of the Neapolitan series. We've done the first 2 books on previous episodes, which will be linked in the show notes. So go check those out first, if you haven't. Otherwise, this will seem strange out of context, potentially. Also, this book was originally written in Italian. We read and are discussing the English translation by Anne Goldstein.
Yeah, and when you listen back to those episodes, I feel like you get like a random flavor of how this podcast has evolved.
Yeah,
like episode
dude.
1, we had a guest in person. I think it was maybe the second or third guest we ever had on the show.
And we were still using the snowball mic for all 3 of
so
us.
The audio is like not great. Book 2 was more recent, but I feel like in the 6 months or so since then, we have really like streamlined how we formulate these episodes, and I feel like I'm so excited for this one because I feel like we have so much more of an arc to what we're going to say today than we did in those other episodes. You get to see how the Neapolitan series evolves and how Julie and I evolve as podcast hosts.
Little time capsule.
Yeah. As a heads up, we will be discussing the entirety of the book, so if you care about spoilers, here's your official warning. And if you don't care about spoilers or you read it already, welcome to the party.
Welcome. Or if you've seen the show, honestly.
Yeah.
The spoilers are the same.
Yeah, it seems like the show's a pretty close adaptation with some, I think, very tasteful choices to modify it for TV, to do it in 8 episodes?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and also then, of course, because it's a series, spoilers for the previous 2 books. But neither of us have read book 4, so no worries.
Yeah, we won't get ahead of ourselves.
Yeah, we have no idea what happened.
We can only speculate at what is to come.
Yeah. Okay, so before we get into it, if you like our show, feel free to rate, review, and subscribe on any and all podcast platforms. We're on most of them. Also, if you are a person who purchases books, there is a way you can help us out. In the show notes, anytime you see a link to a book, that will take you to our bookshop.org affiliate page, and you can order a book from a local bookstore, and a very small percentage of that will kick back to us so that we can continue buying books for this show. And finally, if you would like to support us financially, you can become a member at buymeacoffee.com/bookclubwithjv. The most recent perk that is literally happening, we're recording one today, is our sort of reaction review series on the Pachinko adaptation on Apple TV. And I'm very excited about it. So it's $3 a month and you can come share your reactions to the show as well. And that's it.
Yeah.
Thanks for joining. So, yeah, you read this a long time ago.
Yes. My experience reading Those Who Leave and Those Who Stay. I read it immediately after we recorded our last Elena Ferrante book 2 of this series. So it means yet again that I'm recording this episode way later than when I actually finished the novel. I remember being really into this book and pretty much flying through it. The plot moves so quickly in a very energizing way. So even though it's a very long novel, I don't feel like it took me that long. I feel like I've been reading each of these books. The first one took me a little while, but once you get into it, you just you're sucked in. I think Ferrante's writing is beautiful and the story is captivating, even when you pretty much dislike every character at some point. Except Enzo, because hashtag Enzo forever, he's just so great. And the TV version of him is adorable.
He's so sweet. With those little eyes. I just want to tussle his hair.
I feel like if he was in Lord of the Rings, he would have been a hobbit.
Yes.
For sure.
100%.
Major hobbit vibes.
Yeah.
So I did start watching the HBO show season 3. I haven't watched much of season 1 or any of season 2, and it's been a really enjoyable watch so far. So I might go back eventually and watch those first 2 seasons. I really appreciate that each season maps onto the book. So it was a good like refresher for this episode that we're recording, since it's been a little bit since I read the actual novel.
Yeah. And the timing has worked very well for us. Yeah, I sort of went in the reverse. I started watching season 3 of the show first because one of my friends here is a big fan, and she was like, we should like hang out and have watch parties. And I was like, I haven't done a watch party in so long since I lived with my friends. So I got very emotional. I was like, yes, please, let's do it. And the show is like, this season in particular, so good. It's so good. And so that motivated me to read the book. And I honestly think season 3 might be, I don't know if this is sacrilege, but it feels better than the book. I mean, obviously the final episodes, I haven't watched them yet. So yeah, I'm curious to see how they do that. Whereas season 2 was the reverse. The book was way better, and it was kind of a slog getting through season 2 of the show. But book 2, I was like, whew, I flew through it. So it's interesting. I think maybe some of the political stuff, because as we'll get into, like, the whole plot of this book is like kind of about politics in a way that the previous 2 are not at all. And I feel like the way that they were able to dramatize it just visually works really, really well. Mm-hmm. And I think one of the things that I like the most is that the times where it's just Elena's story on her own, they condense it.
Yeah.
Because I just, like, I'm a Leela stan, you know? I'm all for Leela. Leela's my girl. Of course, I relate more, I think, maybe to Elena than Leela now. So I am able to connect with her more than I did when she was a kid. You know, there are long stretches where it's just her in her own head, and sometimes I get a little bored. Anyway, so I finished the book like last week, and as always, it reads way faster than it looks. And it was really fun to see the characters start to get, as difficult as it is to read about politics sometimes, it's also cool to see them get involved with political movements in the 70s that I'm, like, familiar with. Like the student riots in Paris. I didn't realize there were similar ones in Italy. That was really interesting. And then the women's liberation movement, which of course we had in the States. And, you know, there was some, like, anti-Vietnam War discussions. Like, they're kind of, the way it started to overlap with some history that I'm more familiar with was very cool.
So this is our third time talking about Elena Ferrante as an author, but you might have missed those episodes, or to be honest, forgot, because the first episode where we would go in depth about Ferrante was like 2 years ago. But here's some of the key things to know about our author. One is that we don't actually know who the author is. Elena Ferrante is a pseudonym, and the author has worked very hard to remain anonymous and to operate only under their pseudonym, as far as we know, and even only takes a select few interviews through email, like won't even be on the phone with someone. And I'm assuming the translator has access to the actual author, but who knows, maybe those are email exchanges as well. So the Italian author known as Elena Ferrante has published 12 books, including one that came out just over a month ago, which I'm very curious to read because it is a collection of 4 nonfiction essays about Ferrante's approach towards writing. It's called In the Margins, On the Pleasures of Reading and Writing. And to get in the author's own voice some opinions sounds very interesting to me, because Elena Ferrante's novels, especially the Neapolitan novels, are written so closely to the character's voice. It is the grown-up character of Elena who's speaking. I'm really intrigued.
Yeah.
And okay, I feel so validated, Julia. Get ready for this. So, in our last episode about Ferrante, I theorized that she wrote this entire story and then decided to break it up into 4 books because they all seem to pick up exactly where one leaves off. And then I found this quote that she wrote in an email interview. Quote, "In its first rough draft, the story of Leela and Lanu fit very easily into a single substantial volume. Only when I began to work on that first text did I understand that there would be 2, 3, 4 volumes."
Oh, wow.
So, yes, the rest of this interview, we will link it in the show notes. I found very fascinating and exciting, you know, that this interviewer was able to get Ferrante, like, through email to respond to some stuff about their writing and their approach towards the craft. But yes, it felt very validating to know, like, this originally was, like, one whole story. And then as Ferrante was writing, realizing, no, this is going to be multiple volumes. but very much like, where's a point that we can just chop this story and then re-enter it?
Yeah.
It really could just be the next chapter, but like there's like a page limit and they were like, okay, here's the point where it makes sense to publish this number of pages and we'll continue on from there. And these 4 volumes came out in quick succession in Italian and were translated then in quick succession into English as well as many other languages.
Honestly, her life sounds like the dream. Like, no one has your number. They can approach you through email and maybe you'll say no. And you just write your little books and no one has any expectations because they don't know who you are.
Yeah.
And then you make a ton of money.
You like go to the grocery store and no one thinks of you as anything but, that one person that comes into the grocery store every week.
Yeah. Just like your aunt who's kind of reclusive, who just lives, like, that sounds great.
Yeah. And I'm really curious how tight the circle is of people who know who Ferrante is. I feel like it's got to be pretty locked down.
Yeah.
Like, I'm sure there's many people at the publishing houses that don't know who Ferrante is. I feel like it's probably her editor, like the single editor probably, maybe like 1 or 2 others, probably someone in finance who's signed a lot of NDAs.
Yeah.
To be able to like pay this person.
To pay royalties. How much of her family knows,
Right, that's part of it too, is like, I'm sure like a random cousin doesn't know, because that's why stuff leaks. It's like, oh, I have something to tell you when you're like drunk at a bar and talking too much to the person next to you.
My great aunt is Elena Ferrante. Like if you don't have a super strong tie to the person.
Yeah.
But it's like a claim to fame, like, I don't know. If I were her, I wouldn't trust all of them. Like maybe she picks one relative and like bestows upon them the knowledge. She's like, I trust you. You shall be my apprentice. Trains them to take up the mantle. And then there's just an eternal Elena Ferrante. Forever.
Elena Ferrante never dies. In like 150 years, people get skeptical. And they're like, wait a second.
I think that would be great.
Yeah. Okay, so book 3. What happens? Give
What
us
happened?
a rundown.
There was so much plot that I didn't write complete sentences. So let me roll up my sleeves here. Book 3 picks up right where book 2 left off, where Nino, the bane of my existence, the son of the journalist, he and Elena had like a kiss, but then he goes and has an affair with Leela at the beach, and then Leela gets knocked up, and then they break up, and it's like a disaster. For some reason, Elena's still in love with him. So they reunite at this book signing event and he like sticks up for her with this like old fart professor. And they go to dinner with Elena's future in-laws and she's just like realizes how madly in love with him she is. She's like, if he asked, I would have sex with him right now. I would leave my life for him. And we're like, no girl, don't do that. Nothing happens. He leaves. We don't see him again for a long time. So she's currently engaged to Pietro, who's a dude from a very rich family, very influential parents. They're the ones who got Elena's book published. So before they're engaged, but they're not married yet. So before they get married, Elena is sort of swept up in the new author stuff. She's going to book events, book signings to like answer questions about her book. All the different newspapers are writing reviews about her, and some of them are very bad and some of them are very good because she's written about women's sexuality and people have very strong feelings about that.
Namely, the men.
Namely, the men. And some of the women have very strong reactions to either negative or positive, where they're like, you're the only one who's ever said this that I've read. And so she's at this book event at a university while there's like a bunch of student protests going on and like a lot of political fervor among university students. And she runs into her sister-in-law, Maria Rosa. So Elena stays the night at her house and finds out that Nino knocked up Maria Rosa's friend, then he left her. And so Elena's sitting there helping take care of this very fussy baby and realizes that this is another child of the man for some reason she's still in love with, that he's just like, hit it and quit it. So then her fiance comes and visits and impresses her family and asks for her hand. And they have some conflicts over like getting married in a church versus a courthouse and all this kind of stuff. But he ultimately wins over Elena's family and they are officially engaged. And then Leela has a breakdown. And so Elena kind of drops everything and goes to help Leela. And we find out that Leela has been sort of caught up in the middle of this scandal around the communist party, the local chapter, she's been working in a factory, and her partner Enzo and their friend Pasquale have been super involved with the local sort of communist chapter. Lila goes, and she gets super fed up with all these sort of super educated people who have no idea what her life is like. And so she talks very eloquently, and they publish her words without her consent, and it gets her in trouble at work. And she finds out that her boss is actually in debt to the Solaras, who are the sort of crime family that run the neighborhood that Lila and Elena came from, and they've started expanding. And so a lot of people owe them money, and they kind of run Naples. So Lila's in a lot of danger. She leaves her job. She's super sick, and she asks for Elena. And so Elena's there, and Elena's like so excited to kind of be in a position of power. She like uses her new wealthy connections to like fix everything in Lila's life. She takes her doctors, she gets her birth control, she finds a lawyer to sue for damages. She starts writing articles about the treatment of workers in this factory and all this kind of stuff. And so then Lila slowly heals, and she and Enzo move back to the neighborhood. And through another connection of Elena's, they start working for IBM. Very early IBM.
If you remember from book 2, Enzo and Lila were studying early computer technology, like from a book. They were teaching themselves. They didn't have any computers to actually work on, but they were just teaching themselves on their own. And so Enzo, being the man, has an introduction, but also knows Lila's super smart, maybe even smarter than him. And both start working for IBM together.
Yeah. So it seems like, you know, their life is going to improve a bit. And so then we follow Elena. She gets married to Pietro, even though he won't let her go on the pill, which is a big red flag. And she gets pregnant immediately. So she has plans to write a second book, but she can't. She really enjoys being pregnant, and she gets to write and work and stuff, and she's super excited about her career path. But the minute she has the child, everything changes. She has no time or energy. Pietro kind of abandons her, and their marriage becomes this super empty, there's no love there anymore, and she just becomes a full-time mom with no friends and no help and no connections, really. I mean, her mother-in-law comes and helps a bit, but at the end of the day, it's her alone. She becomes super depressed and doesn't have any energy to write or anything, and so she kind of gives up on writing. Is resigns herself to being kind of a miserable mother, and she tries to get some independence by sort of getting involved with the women's liberation movement, with other feminists, particularly her sister-in-law, Maria Rosa. But after years of not working, she doesn't have the courage to publish any of her writing again until Nino shows up at her house.
Bum, bum, bum.
Da, da, da. And they, have the romance that the books have been building to all this time, and I understand that it needs to happen as much as I hate it. All right? It would be weird if it didn't happen. And he compliments her and believes in her in all the right ways. And so she publishes this feminist essay, and she feels some personal power again. And I think she associates it with him. At the same time, Lila accepts that she's kind of resigned to the fact that the Solaras are going to rule her world no matter where she goes. She can't really escape them. So she ends up taking a job working for Michele Solara, who's the head of the family, because it pays really, really well, and it gives her protection. And so she becomes kind of a wealthy, powerful figure for a lot of people she's connected to in the neighborhood. And so the book ends with Lila and Elena fighting about Elena's very bad life choices. And Elena and Nino get on a plane, and that's the end of the book.
And I'm sure book 4 will pick up when the plane lands.
Probably, yeah. By the time the plane lands, Elena's going to be I have made a grave mistake. I'm calling it now. Oh, man.
Way to go.
That
was
was
soft applause so I don't blow out my mic.
So much plot happens in each of these books. I think that's why they read so fast.
Yeah. Before we get into our discussion of themes of this book, I wanted to take a moment to do a brief exploration of the genre of historical fiction, which, if you've listened to several of our historical fiction episodes, is usually where I just go off because I'm excited. But I think this is the first time that we've talked really about what historical fiction can do when it comes to learning about ideologies and political movements of the past. Yeah. And how maybe they tie into things that come after or before it. Because we love a good context. So when we learned history at school in an American setting, or when we were learning history through textbooks, we were presented with facts and dates and key players, but there was often little or no exploration of what the point of view of those textbook was. This was just presented as quote unquote fact, which can be problematic.
Mm-hmm.
But also it's just kind of a way to be like, this thing happened and then this thing happened and you should probably all know that all these things happened. But when we read historical fiction, so we get a moment to explore these key events and movements and ideologies, but through the lens of very specific characters. And of course, this is all crafted by the author. And so it kind of gives us maybe a different look at these movements as less the central thing and more of the thing that's happening around the lives of people.
Yeah.
This is why I personally think I love historical fiction so much, is because I like to see the way that these things I've learned about in history classes, which I did enjoy in my history classes, how they impacted the daily life of people. So in this series, but particularly in this third book, we see that the political and social movements of the 1960s and 70s in Italy intertwine with the life of Ferrante's cast of characters that we've got to meet and learn to love and hate in books 1 and 2. Yeah, Julie, I would love to hear your approach or maybe your feelings reading these more historical movements. This is a very political book for us. Like, we don't tend to stray into this area often.
I mean, like, the entire plot revolves around communism and feminism, which are things that we're still arguing about today, obviously. But within this particular historical context, in Italy, in the 70s, like, this is just a world that feels so far removed. Like, I feel like we stopped talking about Italy after Mussolini.
In, like, our American history classes, yeah.
Yeah, and then that was it. Like, I genuinely don't think we talked about Italy after World War II. And, you know, women's liberation and communism look very different in America and have been for a while, you know. And so I called Victoria very frantic yesterday and I was like, I don't feel confident enough to talk about this, because I feel like when the plot revolves around these big ideologies, it's hard for me to separate what are the ideologies that are running around at this time versus just Elena's perspective and her own emotions and the way that she's telling us about these things. Because she has a very particular perspective. You know, she's come from a very poor neighborhood that was run by fascists, honestly, and communism was very dangerous to be a part of. And then she fights really hard within the system to sort of climb as high socially as she can. And then she gets aligned with, she marries into a very wealthy, very influential family who are communist by name, but it's unclear how much they do, you know? You know, it seems like the extent of their participation is like funding a newspaper and not being married in a church. And so Elena's coming from a very different perspective than Leela. And I felt like I just had a harder time knowing where we were supposed to land on it. And maybe we're not supposed to make up our mind about it, but it made it a lot harder for me to make up my mind about what this book is about, what the events are trying to tell us, how I'm supposed to feel about different things. So it's tricky, but I'm also really grateful to get this kind of perspective, because this is not something that I've ever read about before, really. Mm-hmm. It's kind of on the ground.
Yeah, that was such a great reminder too that, like, I don't have a context for Italy beyond Mussolini.
Yeah.
And this book has been kind of like an entry point into the experiences of post-war Italy and through the 60s and 70s as well. So it's interesting to kind of balancing, we're being exposed and reminded of the historical movements that are happening, but through the very distinct point of view of Elena. And so I don't think we're supposed to have a grounding on this is right and this is wrong, because that's what the characters are grappling with. And I think it's a good introduction and exposition of, like, these big ideas affect people's day-to-day life. And it may not be as cut and dry as I'm a communist and my life looks like this, or I'm a fascist and my life looks like this. But it's like a messy blend of all of it, because the other side, quote unquote, is your neighbor down the street. It's not like some distant foreign political group that you don't have any interaction with. So we kind of, in the rest of our episode, are going to talk about this common pattern that we see through the political discussions of this novel. and how we see the contrast between a person's political convictions and the way that they actually live their day-to-day lives, which I think is really interesting and also very relevant, because I don't think this is limited to Italians in the 60s and 70s, but all of us as humans, a very human experience of living within contradictions. So the theme of hypocrisy comes up a lot in this book. You know, hypocrisy can be such a judgmental word, but kind of teasing it out for us, I think it means like the difficulty of living out your principles while also living life. You can't always make the most principled decision every single moment of the day.
Mm-hmm.
Fairly early on in this story, we have a moment where Elena is straight up called a hypocrite by someone else. And so, Julie, do you want to read that passage?
Yeah. Okay, so this dude, he's like an artist friend. This is when she's staying at her sister-in-law's house, and she is trying to go to bed. And there's this dude walks in and is like, "Can I sleep with you?" And she's like, "Sleep?" And he's like, "Literally just lie next to you." And she's like, "Oh, why?" So she says, "Go away, please. I don't even know you. I'm Juan. I showed you my work. What else do you want?" I felt him sit down on the bed. I saw his dark profile. I felt his breath that smelled of cigars. "Please," I said, "I'm sleepy." "You're a writer. You write about love. Everything that happens to us feeds the imagination and helps us create. Let me be near you. It's something you'll be able to write about." He touched my foot with the tips of his fingers. I couldn't bear it. I leapt up and turned on the light. He was still sitting on the bed in underpants and an undershirt. "Out," I hissed, in such a peremptory tone, so clearly close to shouting, so determined to attack and to fight with all my energy that he got up slowly and said with disgust, "You're a hypocrite." He went out. I closed the door behind him. There was no key. I was appalled. I was furious. I was frightened. A bloodthirsty dialogue was whirling in my head. I waited for a while before going back to bed, and I didn't turn out the light. What had I intimated about myself? What sort of person did it seem that I was? What legitimized Juan's request? Was it the reputation of a free woman that my book was giving me? Was it the political words I had uttered, which evidently were not only a dialectical jousting, a game to prove that I was as skillful as a man, but defined the entire person, sexual availability included? And she goes on.
Yeah.
She's discovering that by writing about sex in a probably very nuanced way, very critical way from a woman's perspective, which is done so rarely, men around her just started taking that as an open invitation to just present themselves. She doesn't even know this guy. He's just like, "I presume you want to have sex with me in order to like write about it, I guess." And when she says no, he calls her a hypocrite. And she's not a hypocrite for setting boundaries. Like,
Right.
you know, she's just saying, "No, I don't know you. I'm engaged." Like that all seems very plain, but he thinks that, you know, because you've had sex once, you just want to have sex with everybody or something. Yeah, that moment is really infuriating and I think really presents a good starting point for our conversation on like the hypocrisy of characters who believe one thing and do something else. And Elena is a hypocrite at certain points in the book. I don't think she's being one here, but it forces her to kind of confront like, oh, the ideas that I have physical ramifications in my day-to-day life.
Yeah. And I think this is where she's, especially early in this novel, grappling with like who she is as a writer and how that impacts her day-to-day life and who is she to become. And I think that's like the big through line of this story is figuring out who she is. And often Elena looks to others around her to kind of tell her who she is. And in this scene, you see her stand up for herself, which I think is like really great since she isn't always able to in other parts of the book and other parts of the series, and to kind of declare like, no, like I can write things. And again, she wrote a fictional novel, but everyone reads it as this is her life. She wrote a fictional novel and she can write things without having to then become what anyone thinks that would mean for her.
Yeah.
But yeah, Juan is only one of many men in this book that we're like, really, dude? Like, please stop. And a lot of these people are these academic, quote unquote, radicals who have these really big philosophical ideas and maybe put a lot of work, whether it's through their writing or their activism, towards these ideas that align with communism and kind of seem to be progressive in their communities, but then when push comes to shove in their daily lives, we have many examples of these quote unquote radicals who don't seem to live out their principles with their family or the women in their lives. The biggest example is Pietro, who is Elena's fiance, then husband, father of her children. And he seems like a very promising husband at first because he's very respectful. He has all these high-minded ideals. In the TV show, I was reminded of this, like these really beautiful moments he has with her family being like, that seem to really elevate, like, Elena is amazing and worthy, and it is my duty to not disappoint, to only respect her and support her. And like he seems like encouraging of her writing career, and that she like engage or like interact with like people in his life when they're engaged. But once they get married and have kids, he's like kind of an asshole.
Yeah.
He tells her she's exaggerating and he refuses to help her take care of the children or take care of the house. At first he refuses to help hire anyone to help her. And like we said in the summary, like he won't let her go on the pill because, quote, she can write her next book when she's had the baby, which is like, what?
Insane.
And yeah, you see this like, yeah, I believe that, you know, women are intellectuals and look at all these women in my life that I respect. Oh, but you also need to be the mother of my child and fit this very specific mold that I still hold on to that's very traditional. Even though that he's given up on traditions of religion and the church, he still holds on to these like nuclear family motherhood traditions. But there's one scene that we should read because holy cow. If you don't know what you think about Pietro yet, let's give you an example. So Pietro and Elena have been fighting for a while, bickering back and forth, and Elena is like depressed and like needs help. And so her mother-in-law, his mother, comes and helps out and includes bringing in outside help in the family.
She hires a woman named Clelia as like a nurse, but also someone to take care of household chores and stuff.
Like a live-in nanny.
Yeah, a live-in nanny, like paying someone to do the work that he was expecting Elena to do for free. Anyway, so when he finds out that his mother hired help, his response is, "I don't want slaves in my house," he said. Adele answered calmly. Adele is his mother. "She's not a slave. She's a salaried employee." And I, fortified by the presence of my mother-in-law, stammered, "Do you think I should be a slave?" And he says, "You're a mother, not a slave." She says, "I wash and iron your clothes. I clean the house. I cook for you. I've given you a daughter. I bring her up in the midst of endless difficulties. I'm worn out." And he says, "And who makes you do that? Have I ever asked you for anything?" Bro, yes. Like, if she didn't cook, was he gonna cook? Like, what would happen? Would he get angry if she didn't cook? I'm like, so... He has... His assumptions are so deep that he doesn't even notice that he has them or that they're putting pressure on Elena. He has no clue. And he, like, gaslights her, essentially, saying, like, this isn't your job. You don't have to do it. But then he gets mad when she hires someone else to do it, and he refuses to do it himself. He will not help with the baby at all.
I love this next sentence. "I couldn't bear to argue, but Adele did. She crushed her son with a sometimes ferocious sarcasm, and Clelia remained." And I was like, yeah, go Adele. That his mom is like, hell no.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, he's like kind of that first example. And we get this moment when Elena's mother is speaking to her about Pietro as well.
Elena's mother's unhappy that Pietro won't marry Elena in a church because up until recently, a marriage wasn't real unless it was done, you know, by the church. And so her mother is worried that Pietro could just leave her if he doesn't marry her in a church. You know, so Elena and her mother are arguing about this, and Elena's like, he has principles. But she's just kind of gonna go along with whatever Pietro wants, essentially. And then her mother says, "Then why do you let him order you? If he has principles, don't you have them? Make yourself respected." And I felt like that was such a... Going back and finding that quote, it was very prescient, I guess. Like, if he has principles, he should also respect hers. And she shouldn't just go along with whatever his are because he's not going to ensure her safety. Only she can do that. And I think her mother really understands that. She expresses it very aggressively in a way that we
Yeah.
don't always enjoy. But she understands that. And Elena, doesn't want to be her mother, but at a certain point, she kind of has to realize, like, he's not going to give me anything.
Mhm.
He won't even let her go on the pill, which when I first watched it in the show, I was screaming at her like, no, girl, don't. Because the way they dramatize it, they're having that argument in the car on the way to City Hall to get married. And you're like, girl, you're going to go marry him? You didn't finish that conversation. Lock it down. You got to be able to take the pill.
Yeah, and it's interesting reading that quote from Elena's mother in the context of what happens later. You think in the context of her conversation with her mother, it seems to be about whether or not to get married in the church. But I think there's a bit of foreshadowing here, and Elena's mother is like onto something as far as like, if he has principles, like, what does that mean? You don't? Like, you just go along with his principles? Like, you need to hold your own. And that comes to bear when things get more intense, like having a child and trying to work from home while being the, woman of the house. So, yeah, you can kind of see it coming, which is annoying because at first I really wanted to like Pietro.
Yeah.
Because there was moments that I thought he was really great, but his principled living did not shine through into their marriage. But other men in this book includes Nino. And yeah, I know you have strong feelings about him. I also really don't like him. I feel like I don't know. There's something about Elena's like pining for him, kind of like you said. It's kind of like what is it, Chekhov's gun? If you see a gun, It has to go off by the end of the play. It's kind of like we saw this coming for so long because she's been pining for him, and there's part of me that like sympathizes with that, of like, wow, you really love this person and you overlook their problematic behavior or the way they don't treat you well. That really sucks. But it's also like really annoying as a reader, because you're like, we can see he's not great. Yeah, so with all his like romantic beliefs and strong political convictions, we learn he's just like abandoning pregnant women he's knocked up left and right, and he's not like providing child support. He's not seeing how these people are doing. He speaks badly of Leela when she's not there, and at that time we all believe that the child that Leela had was from Nino. As the child grows up, we realize he's like a spitting image of Stefano, who's Leela's first husband. And so it's like, okay, it wasn't Nino's child, but still the implication at the time was that like it was. And he was like, I can't write and be my professor self and have my strong political convictions with a woman and a child around. I need to leave it all behind. So it is also like very like concerning when you realize he's married at some point, because you're like, well, you haven't been very faithful to any woman before. What is this marriage going to do? And then, yeah, by the end of the novel, he's left his wife to be with Elena, and dun dun dun, we don't know what happens yet, but oof, it's difficult, especially as we see Nino be more and more respected in his field and in his political circles, but continuing to disrespect women again and again and again.
It's so infuriating for both of these men to not understand the ramifications of having children on women's careers. Like, it's completely outside their imagination that having a child would hamper their ability to continue on the professor track, to continue publishing, to continue writing articles and stuff. Like, Pietro's so confused of why Elena can't also be a writer while being a full-time wife and mother. He's so confused by that.
Yeah, which is also frustrating because he doesn't want the baby to be in the room with him while he's writing because it's distracting.
Yes!
But then he's like, but you should be able to write. And she's like, what do you mean?
Like, why can't you?
Yeah.
And Nino does the same thing where he's like, oh, we should be able to like, kind of sexual liberation and fall in love and follow our hearts and whatever. But he's extremely career driven and he respects women who are, and he has sex with a lot of them. And then when they have babies, he's like, sucks to be you. Like, he doesn't want to be tied down with a child, with a family, because he thinks it'll get in his way. And he doesn't understand why that is also the case of the women that he's with. He's like, oh, it's going to get in my way. Like, oh my God.
Well, speaking of not understanding ramifications.
Yeah.
The communists in this novel, the communist group, especially the academic communists, don't seem to actually understand the ramifications of some of their actions for the actual working class that they say that they are fighting on behalf of. So we see that Leela, when she speaks up and speaks very eloquently about her experience as a worker in a factory, they publish her words without her consent, and it puts her life and work into jeopardy. And there's one scene I want to read that both in the book and in the TV show, I just wanted to like throw something because I was like, oh my gosh, this is so frustrating to see. Okay. So Leela is with Nadia, who, if you remember, is the daughter of Professor Galliani, who was Elena's high school teacher. So Nadia and Nadia's brother, who's a doctor. Pasquale is also in the room, who is Leela's friend from the neighborhood. He's also a bit more working class. Like he's a construction worker, and he's like very involved with the Communist Party. In this scene specifically, Leela is confronting the group about how publishing her words without her consent has impacted her, and she's speaking directly to Armando, who's the brother of Nadia. He's also a doctor. Leela says, "You should have informed me." And this is Armando. "It's true, but there wasn't time. If you really want the time, you find it. We are few and our initiatives are more every day. What work do you do? In what sense? What do you do for a living?" "I'm a doctor." "Like your father?" "Yes." "And at this moment, are you risking your job? Could you end up in the street at any moment along with your son?" Armando shook his head unhappily and said, "Competing for who's risking the most is wrong, Lena." And Pasquale, "He's been arrested twice, and I have 8 charges against me. Nobody here risks more or less than anyone else." "Oh, no?" "No," said Nadia. "We're all on the front lines and ready to assume our responsibilities." Then Leela, forgetting that she was in somebody else's house, cried, "So if I should lose my job, I'll come and live here. You'll feed me. You'll assume responsibility for my life." Nadia answered placidly, "If you like, yes." 4 words only. Leela understood that it wasn't a joke, that Nadia was serious. And even if Bruno Socavo fired his entire workforce, she, with that sickly sweet voice of hers, would give the same senseless answer. She claimed that she was in the service of the workers, and yet from her room in a house full of books and with a view of the sea, she wanted to command you. She wanted to tell you what you should do with your work. She decided for you. She had the solution ready, even if you ended up in the street. It was on the tip of Leela's tongue. If I want, can smash everything much better than you. I don't need you to tell me in that sanctimonious tone how I should think. What should I do? But she restrained herself.
Whoa, baby. Oh, yeah. Man, I was so angry.
And in the show, I think that the line from Nadia is basically like, "Step aside, Leela," which is like so frustrating. And reading this, it's all obvious that we can point out this hypocrisy, but like maybe we can also feel it because it happens all the time, you know?
Yeah.
Where you feel very passionate, or we feel very passionate about certain marginalized communities or people that need support, and the instinct is to rush in and do the work and speak up for quote unquote those who have no voice, when it's like, no, that's not a good way to be an activist for another community. I think I get, really frustrated with Pasquale, who's like, oh, he's been arrested before. Yeah, but he's not in prison now. He comes from wealth and he still has his job as a doctor. So even though Armando was imprisoned, it was a moment in time. Whereas for Leela, losing this work, she doesn't know yet that she has other opportunities and she finds them. But in the moment, it feels like this could be the death of me. This could be the end of any opportunity for my son if I don't have money at the end of the day to buy food and pay for housing.
Like, yes, Armando was arrested. Yeah, but I'm sure his parents could afford his bail, and he still has his job, and he still has wealth, and he still has power. Whereas any small amount of money, any interruption in Leela's ability to make money could literally kill her and her family. But her job is also killing her. It's not good for her. She does need support from these wealthier people who can potentially cause change. She starts to unionize a little bit with her fellow workers, of compiling a list of different abuses and things that need to be fixed. And when they start talking to each other, they notice certain health patterns of people who work in this particular job get coughs a lot. And so that needs to be fixed. You know, she starts working on it, but she like doesn't really have any support from these people who say that they're trying to support her because they just can't understand the stakes of her life or what her day-to-day life is like or what would actually be helpful. And they refuse to listen to her on what she wants to happen, what she thinks would be helpful, and just talk over her and tell her to get out of the way and that she's not brave or something, which is bullshit. And this is a conversation in so many different movements, and so often criticize people who come from a different background for having a different stance on what is helpful to them, what is liberating for them. You know what I mean? And like, no, you're wrong about yourself. Like, no, that's such a shitty thing to do. And so, yeah, this whole section got me really fired up.
It is complicated because like there's the difficulty of Leela doesn't have the time and energy to put towards a lot of these things. Like she even says, like, I'm not usually in these meetings. Like she went to that one meeting. She's like, because I'm tired. Like I work all day and I go home and I sleep. Like that's all I have time for. And so you have these people who have the privilege of time who can be doing more, but because their principled living comes before actually listening to the workers, the way that they put their energy and time and resources may not actually align with what is immediately helpful for the workers. There wasn't a conversation with Leela of like, we want to publish this. It could mean X, Y, and Z. Are you okay with that? Or like, can we work with you together? Like, was passing out published leaflets outside of the factory actually helpful for literally anyone in the factory? I would say no.
Because Leela points out that a lot of them can't read.
Yeah, and like things like super basic of like, we're going to pass out these leaflets so people understand like what? That their working condition sucks? They're already aware of that.
Yeah.
Like, they live it. They don't need a pamphlet telling them it's like sucks to work there. Maybe it would have been more helpful to publish her words to someone in power that could do something about it, to be strategic about it in a way that could work towards change, maybe call out Sokovo in a way that wasn't going to immediately endanger the lives and well-being of the workers at this factory. So in a similar way, as Elena comes into more privilege and more power, we see this hypocrisy almost play out in herself as well. Not only in the way she interacts with Leela, but also in the way she interacts with herself. Elena is learning about the women's liberation movement, and even if she doesn't fully understand the politics or the ideologies of it, she is already beginning to make decisions that would give women in her life more access, more power, and more freedom. But then she also, at the same time, tends to make decisions that give herself less freedom. So a good example of this is that she uses her newfound privilege through connections to bring Leela to see all these specialists to help Leela's health. And eventually Leela gets the pill from this experience, where Elena, because she has that privilege and power and that access, could also get on the pill, but she ultimately doesn't through pressure from her fiance. So in that way, she's like helping Leela have more liberation and freedom as a woman, but doesn't for herself. I think these scenes are also particularly fascinating and difficult to watch and read because Elena becomes like the voice of Leela in these doctors' offices, where the doctors speak over Leela, talk about Leela's body to Elena, as if Leela was like Elena's dependent, as if Leela wasn't intelligent or autonomous enough to make decisions about her own body or understand what was happening to her body. I think that was like, it's really played out well in the TV show as you see Leela get physically like cut out of conversations as the doctors like chatting it up with Elena.
And Elena likes it. She likes having that kind of power over Leela. She says, I felt like the knight in an ancient romance, as wrapped in his shining armor, after performing 1,000 astonishing feats throughout the world, he meets a ragged, starving herdsman who, never leaving his pasture, subdues and controls horrible beasts with his bare hands and with prodigious courage. She sees herself as this highly stylized and wealthy and glamorous and courageous figure who then sort of meets her match in this like peasant who's never left his fields in his life, and so she's comparing herself to this kind of romantic figure, and she really enjoys it. And you feel kind of icky because you're like, I'm really happy that Leela is getting the care that she needs and is gonna get a good job and is like going to be able to rest and going to be able to heal. Like, I'm really happy, but also it feels icky because you're like, Elena doesn't, I don't know, like she's starting to become, or she's maybe trying on a role, perhaps, of a wealthy, influential woman.
Mm-hmm.
And she understandably enjoys it because she hasn't had any power up until this point, but then she's using it to control other women. So I don't know. It's very messy.
Yeah, which I guess is like the whole theme, right? Of like, she has these ideas and principles and now she has power, but when she lives her everyday life, like, what does that look like? What does embracing feminism for her look like in the day-to-day world? I think part of this, like we kind of touched on at the beginning of this discussion, was that she's trying to figure out who she is. And in a way, in these scenes, especially when she's flexing her power, we see her try to be like Adele, who is her mother-in-law, a powerful woman who comes in and fixes things. And Elena's always trying to impress her and doesn't want to let her down. She doesn't want to let down her friends or feel like she's betraying her class. So she's trying to straddle this line, right, of like being like Adele, emulating her, but also trying to hold on to herself and where she comes from. But she doesn't want to be too close to where she comes from because she is different. And you picked out this quote from chapter 63 that I thought really encapsulates what she's struggling with through most of this book.
While she's pregnant, she's doing some writing, and this is kind of her thought process. She's taking care that nothing ended up outside the frame, and that every concept pleased the Irotas, her in-laws, the publishing house, Nino, who surely somewhere was reading her, even Pasquale, why not, and Nadia and Leela, all of whom would finally have to think, look, we were wrong about Lena. She's on our side. See what she's writing. Like, she wants everyone in her life to think she agrees with them and that she's on their side. That's what she's using her new power for and her new voice. And so on the one hand, she, is very powerful and influential. She has a best-selling book that's being translated. Like, she is taking up more space and it's really exciting, but she's also using it to make everyone else happy instead of, I don't know, like it can be kind of hard to watch her live for other people. It feels like so much of what she does is for other people. Even her affair with Nino, like, part of the reason it feels inevitable that she's going to sleep with him is because she uses his figure, his opinions, as, like, the standard by which she measures her ideas and her value. And Leela as well. She uses both of them. But Nino in particular, she's like, I'm only smart if Nino thinks I'm smart. And so he's this person she's measuring herself against is hovering throughout the novel. He appears so rarely until the end. So when they get together, she's so excited that she's finally measuring up to his expectations of her. Like, yes, it's a step of freedom. It's a step outside this marriage that's very crippling for her. It's a step towards her career, potentially. But it's also, like, just jumping to another man, to another standard of someone else's value of her. It's hard to watch.
Yeah, I think I mean, our circumstances and contexts are so different, but I think one of the elements of Elena as a character I most relate to is that trying to figure out who you are and constantly looking to other people and their opinions of you to define who you are. And at risk of oversharing, this is literally what I was talking about in therapy last week, was how recently through my lifestyle choices and stuff, I've been kind of separating myself from a lot of my regular context of being in Chicago, and that constantly checking in of like, what do I want to do today? And looking to a partner who will literally just reflect back to me and be like, no, but what do you want to do today? Like, I'm not going to tell you what to do. As we travel together has been like a really liberating experience to be like, what makes me happy and centering my own happiness has been a long journey that I do not think I'm done with. But that's where I kind of see Elena as well, is learning, and maybe she hasn't even learned yet how to do it, but like, it seems like she's missing the core of herself and doesn't know how to center her own happiness in almost every choice she makes in this book. There are moments where she stands up for herself, but they're few and far between. There's that contradiction too of Elena choosing Nino, because in a way, that is centering her happiness. That is stepping into what she's always wanted. However, it's psychologically difficult because we've witnessed her literally trying to fit the mold of who she thinks Nino wants for a long time. So is it really her happiness anymore, or is it finally being able to fill out the mold that she's created in her mind of who she should be in the context of Nino? It's complicated. And I think that's like the whole theme of this episode I keep coming back to, as far as like hypocrisy is a very judgmental word in a lot of contexts, but there's also so much hypocrisy in our day-to-day life as we struggle with who we want to be, who we believe we should be, and who we actually are.
Yeah. And then Leela's kind of the reverse, right? Like Leela is sticks to her guns so hard that she can sometimes accidentally blow up other people's lives.
Yeah.
Because she doesn't know how to compromise at all. And I think at the end of this book, she's starting to, I don't know if she's starting to learn how to compromise. It kind of feels like she's giving up. Her whole life mission has been to never be dependent on the Solaras. And then she finds out that they can reach her anywhere, including her son. Like, Michele starts kind of grooming her son in a way for the biz. And it really freaks her out. And I think, I don't know, it's hard to tell if it's a compromise or if she's giving up. She doesn't really communicate to Elena how she feels about it. We get some through Enzo and kind of some superficial reports, but Leela starts working for the Solaras for a lot of money.
Yeah.
A lot of money. It's like 3 times her previous salary at IBM or something. But it's a kind of parallel, I guess, maybe, with Elena. It's a step towards power, in a way, within her own neighborhood. She's becoming a more wealthy and influential figure. She's using her brains to do a job, which is very exciting. And also, she's compromising on the biggest thing that she's been fighting for her whole life, was like, I refuse to work with the Solaras. And so it kind of feels like their stories are slightly parallel at this point. Of like, you have to be kind of a hypocrite in order to get some semblance of what you want. Like, life is just too complicated to stick to your ideals 100% every single time, every day. You are constantly negotiating within the context that you're in of like, what decision can I do that's better? And you don't always get it right.
I'm curious to see in book 4 how this plays out for Leela. I mean, we get a hint towards the future because the whole series of novels starts with Leela's son calling Elena, being like, my mother disappeared. And Elena being like, she's always wanted to do that. Mm-hmm. And we're like, that's literally all we know about like future Elena and Leela, pretty much. So I'm curious to see how those dots connect. And I'm also really curious to see, to me, it feels a little bit like Leela is living into the idea of like, keep your friends close and your enemies closer.
Yeah.
Like, I can't run away from the Solaras, so I will get close to them, use their power, use the money they give me. And I'm curious if she, in book 4, will like mold into firmly being on their side. I don't think so. I think she will continue her life's mission of not letting the Solaras control her. Like, if she can step into enough power and have enough money and privileges. And now she kind of has an upper hand. She's like, her use and knowledge of their computers is what makes their business run. She's becoming more and more powerful. Will she flip that on the Solaras in a big dramatic move? Or will it simmer over time into something different? Does she become like the head of the business?
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm curious.
Like, maybe she's trying to take it down from the inside. And also, she's in a very different position than most people who are aligned with the Solaras are borrowing money from them and are in debt to them. Whereas she made herself indispensable to them. They need her.
Yeah.
Which is a very different dynamic. And Michele's like madly in love with her. So that's creepy. But it gives her a lot of power.
So much of this novel and the series as a whole is Elena figuring out who she is and who she wants to be. And we see her constantly trying on these new hats. So the flashy new author, the activist journalist, the nurturing mother, the respectable housewife, the feminist, the communist. And we don't know like where she's going to land in the end. And there's one last paragraph towards the end of the novel, not quite there, that I think kind of encapsulates like what she's struggling with. Do you want to read that? Do you want me to read that?
I can read it.
Okay, cool.
Become. It was a verb that had always obsessed me. but I realized it for the first time only in that situation. I wanted to become, even though I had never known what. And I had become, that was certain, but without an object, without a real passion, without a determined ambition. I had wanted to become something. Here was the point. Only because I was afraid that Leela would become someone and I would stay behind. My becoming was a becoming in her wake. I had to start again to become, but for myself, as an adult outside of her. And that's the whole series.
Yeah, and then the rest of the novel is
what she becomes.
What she becomes. So, for those who enjoyed reading this book and want to read more, my recommendation is to keep reading the series. You have one more left. The Story of the Lost Child, which Julie and I will read, and then we'll talk about here on this podcast.
Yeah.
Sometime.
Sometime.
Another recommendation, I was thinking of like historical fiction that felt very like character driven. I was thinking of Funny Girl by Nick Hornby. It's set in 1960s London, but you do have those themes of like feminism and what it means to be a working woman in the 60s, 70s. So a very different book, very funny, but does kind of have that historical fiction element that might be interesting.
Yeah, that's a connection I would not have made, but it's a very similar time period.
Yeah, and a similar age of the characters during that time.
Yes. Okay, so I was thinking more along the lines of the two big political movements that are happening in this book. And so on the feminism side, I would say for contemporary feminism, Men Explain Things to Me by Rebecca Solnit, the essay and the book as a whole. And then, kind of a classic feminist text, The Second Sex by Simone de Beauvoir. If you want to get some kind of post-war feminist scholarship that might be what Elena was reading at the time. And then Patrick Modiano, we've read his book Dora Bruder on the podcast. He is the same generation as Elena, but in Paris. And so most of his writing is tackling the legacy of the war, what happens after the war, and he writes quite a bit about and was a participant in the student protests in France at the end of the 60s. 1968, I believe, was when there were like riots. Anyway, so two of his books I might recommend, Out of the Dark or the Occupation trilogy.
And the last part of our show, arguably sometimes the best part of our show, is what we're currently obsessed. These are things that are bringing us joy and might have nothing to do with what we talked about today.
Probably not. So I read the first volume of my first manga. It's called Noragami, or the English title is Stray God. And I'm having a lot of fun with it. I've discovered that I can't keep buying these because you read one volume in about an hour and a half, and then you have to keep buying more, and they're all like 12 euros each, and that's very expensive. So we're going to find the online version, but it's really good. It's about like a really low-level god who kind of an anti-hero personality, but, lovable at the end of the day. He's trying to earn enough money to build himself a shrine, and so he goes around helping anyone who will pay him. So he's finding stray cats and stuff, but he hates it, and it's very funny. And then I also cannot recommend enough a music video. This is not my usual thing. Normally I recommend music, but you gotta watch the music video. Jackson Wang's new single is called Blow. He worked with an incredible creative production team and choreographer and production designer to create this whole choreographed, there's multiple scenes of it, but it is the most incredible thing. I watch it over and over and over again. It makes me so happy. The song's good, but the music video is incredible. As a dancer in particular, it made me very happy.
I don't know if I mentioned this already, but I'm reading Black Sun by Rebecca Brownhorse, and it's really good. I'm supposed to also be reading the second book in the Broken Earth trilogy by N.K. Jemisin, because we're going to do it on the podcast eventually. And I will pick up my Kindle to read Jemisin And I'm like, nah. And I like set it down and I'm reading Black Sun instead. So, I mean, I'll get through both of them. But I just feel like I've come such a long way from like, I don't read fantasy to like, I'm literally battling to split my time between 2 fantasy novels right now. It's exciting.
It's very exciting.
I also, okay, so back in college, a friend gifted me a pair of Birkenstocks, which was a very extravagant gift while we were in college.
Wow, yeah.
So like $100 shoes. And I loved them so much. I wore them for 5 years and then they finally were like falling apart. So I finally said goodbye to them last winter when I was cleaning out my shoes and was like, these aren't worth keeping anymore. So recently there is a Birkenstock store in El Paso, Texas, which is surprising. Birkenstock doesn't have like their entire stores, but it's like someone locally who for like a couple decades now has been selling exclusively Birkenstocks. And it just felt like the most magical moment to walk in and just like point and be like, those, I want those.
Oh my God.
And they're like, yeah, we have them like in your size. So the style of Birkenstock I like isn't their classic like 2-strap or 3-strap version. It's like the one that crosses over the toe. So you don't always find it when you're like at a generic like department store that sells Birkenstock. So anyways, it was just a very beautiful experience. Vern also got a pair of Birkenstocks. We were in and out in like 10 minutes and we were like, look at us with our new shoes. And I'm definitely wearing them to like 2 weddings I'm a part of this summer. Both the brides were like, wear whatever shoes you want. I'm like, Birkenstocks.
Hell yeah. Well, that's the end of a season right there.
Oh my gosh, this is the end of a season. I forgot.
The end of season 9.
End of season 9. What are we? Episode 95. So catch us on our next season. We will have an extravaganza for our 100th episode.
Yes, Victoria is planning it. I'm very excited about it. There will be giveaways and stuff. It's going to be great. But in the meantime, go watch our Pachinko review series and please tell us what you think about the show. We'd love to talk with you about it.
These will be more like shorter episodes, off the cuff, less analysis, mostly just fangirling with like the normal amounts of Victoria and Julia critiques.
Yeah.
I'm sure a lot more from Julia than me because she's like actually watches TV shows and film and I'm just along for the ride. But it's going to be a good time and we hope you join us. You can go over to buymeacoffee.com/bookclubwithjv to become a member and watch those little recap videos.
All right. See you then next season.
Thank you for listening to Book Club with Julia and Victoria. We would love to hear your thoughts on this book or the topic we discussed, so you can share your review and recommendations with us on Instagram at BookClubWithJV, on our website, bookclubwithjv.com, or by leaving a review on Apple Podcasts. You can also visit our website for show notes with links to all of the recommendations and the things bringing us joy. If you don't already, go ahead and follow us on whichever podcast platform you are listening on so that you can be notified when our next episode is released. This episode was co-hosted and produced by myself, Victoria Bruick, along with Julia Clausen. Rebecca Gasme provides us with project management support. Our music is composed by Greg Bruick, and our logo was designed by Gabby Fabland. Until next time, happy reading.